Good morning, Sam here. It's good afternoon really. We love guitars and we have some really interesting things coming through over the next day or two, and this is one of them. This is an Ibanez AH-10, Allan Holdsworth designed AH-10, and this is a lovely 1980s guitar with one of those beautiful vintage 80s necks with a skunk stripe down the back. It's been modified, and so it's a single Allan Holdsworth pickup. I don't know much personally about Holdsworth as a player, but it's a really interesting guitar. It's very light as well, just about balanced too. There's just about enough weight in the body. Haven't even heard it yet, so I'll plug it in just for my kind of reference and interest and take you through what this is all about as we go along. Let's have some sound. Keep it on clean. Single pickup. Tone. Volume a bit scratchy, could do with a shot of juice. So, yeah, nice, simple guitar. So this guitar brought to me this morning by Daniel, and this and two other guitars are really interesting in that both of them, or three of them, aren't quite the way Morris thinks he's going to get the vol. Leave it, Morris, you can't have him. Yeah, Daniel feels that these aren't right. There's not something about them that aren't quite right for him, and this is really an interesting situation because it's very common for us guitar players just have a feeling that things aren't right or they don't quite work, and it's so common that we can take a guitar to somebody and get it back and it just feel something's wrong. And the thing is that's really interesting is that quite often once you get a feeling that something's wrong, you can't necessarily put your finger on it, but also it's quite normal that we can't get past that, and it sort of sticks with us all the time. Now, one of the things I'm just going to do is just bending the strings a bit. You can hear we're already out of tune, and this is the one that I was talking to Daniel this morning about when we were just discussing these guitars. That's a classic example of the slackened strings. We can probably go even further out of tune. So one of the things that makes, it's not necessarily the issue that he's concerned about or that isn't working for him, but one of the things that will undoubtedly improve a guitar is to have stable tuning, and that's all to do with the nut. Now the thing on here is a plastic nut, which would be far better being a bone nut in my opinion. Certainly we could cut it and make sure that the strings run smoothly, which is at least 50% of the tuning, the instability. But that's not the key issue here for Daniel. The key issue is that this guitar's been refretted, and it's actually in many ways it's a nice fret job. It's a kind of ebony style board. It's not quite the right term for it, but it's a nice dense black stuff. It's a lovely neck, I have to say. But the frets are these kind of slightly gold looking things. I can't remember the material, but there's that going on. And this is what's, if you take the volume off, this is what's been annoying Daniel. It's a kind of zzz that accompanies the notes. Morris, do you have to play with my micro mesh? Is it necessary? Clearly it is. He's only up there because there's a vole overnighting in the box prior to being released. Anyway, so we have this sort of situation with these three guitars. The other two you'll see later on. One is a Hohner headless and the other one is a Carvin. Wait, stop eating wires. A Carvin Holdsworth designed headless as well. And all three of them, for different, possibly slightly different reasons, don't feel right to the customer. So so I want to state right away that in nothing I'm saying at the moment do I want to imply any criticism either of the luthier who's worked on these guitars before or of the customer who is very much, you know, I recognise very much that feeling of it's not quite right. It's very, very difficult and subjective to describe what it is because we all use different words for it. So it's incredibly difficult for the customer to say what isn't quite right. Equally, in a way, it's very difficult for the luthier to know what isn't quite right for the customer because of that subjectivity. And then it's quite easy, I think, for a lot of guitar techs to fall into bad feeling. And I'm sure in 500 setups I've not been free of that myself. It's impossible that haven't been several, one or two, a few people who whose expectations of the guitar have not met or not been met by what I've done with it. It's just impossible to do otherwise. Nobody could get it 100% right all of the time. So with that said, we're still in this place where the customer wants their guitar to feel like it's right for them. So I'm really interested in all three of these because I recognise that on one hand the difficulty of knowing what the customer means when it's not quite right for them, and on the other hand, from the tech side of it, knowing as I do that there actually are a finite number of things really at play within the guitar, basic guitar setup. So I'm starting off with this one, and the first thing I can tell you about it, and this is, as those of you who may have seen my videos before, that you know this is how I work. I talk out loud as I go through and I make sense of the situation as I go through. So first of all, I'm feeling the guitar is out of tune, so I know straight away that there's slack in the strings. That's not a problem. I also suspect that there's slight pinching and gripping in the nut department because I can see it's plastic and I can see it's a bit, well, it's going to be hard to cut that as free-flowing as you can with bone. So that straight away as a tech, my first thing is, well, look, I'd replace that. A bone would fit the colour scheme because of the white pick guard. I prefer not to have to reuse a piece of black plastic, or for that matter a piece of graphite plastic stuff that you can buy. I don't like that stuff. Not that it doesn't work as a, you know, a self-lubricated thing or whatever it's supposed to. I don't like it for its difficulty in cutting, and when you get down to the low first fret actions that I prefer to aim for, which I kind of talked through with Daniel this morning about the difference that can make on intonation. When it comes to that sort of low action, I need a dependable substance to cut. Right, so having said that, that's my first observation. There's a bit of crackle in the pots, but no trouble at all taking the top off and shooting some contact cleaner or some air and then some contact cleaner. We've got tuning instability, completely to do with slack. This also is a hard-tailed thing, goes through the back, and it has got springs on. And one of the things is it used to have different pickup arrangements here, so there's quite a lot of hollow space under there. I think it kind of contributes sort of to an inherently not noisy but resonant or loud sounding guitar with the electrics off. But I have a feeling there's also quite a bit of vibration going on here in the springs as well, which may not be helping the feel. When I listen up to that and hit the strings, I'm hearing a lot of that buzz is translated through the back there. That's another observation, so I'll take care of that, and if necessary I will find a way of just taping off or sponge filling those, putting a bit of sponge or padding between those springs to just stop them resonating so much. It's all hidden, so it doesn't matter, and they're not in use either. So then the other thing that we came across while test playing this, you can hear that. it's not quite clearing the strings. So we've got what is kind of a fret buzz. It's not a choke. It's not near choking, and it's not near. It's not choking because it's not playing the same note several times. It's not, so the frets aren't so bad they're cutting off notes. It's not even sort of half choked. It's in the land of fret buzz. But Daniel, one of the things about Daniel we talked about this morning, he's a very precise player and very sensitive to the cleanness of the played notes. Some rock guitarists that wouldn't be an issue because you're amplified, you know, by the time you've cranked this thing up and you know, by the time you've cranked it up out of tune, who cares whether it's buzzing at all? You wouldn't hear it on stage. But for somebody who plays it quietly at home and who plays it acoustically, that's a real pain. But also, of course, it is robbing the strings of sustain because the energy is being lost just slightly, or to more or less degree, on the frets. So my first impression was most of the treble notes are not too bad at all. They seem to be clear, but there is definitely some sort of buzzing going on at the lower notes. And having discussed this with Daniel, what I've suggested is that I'm fairly confident, I can't be sure, but I'd be, on balance of probabilities, I'd be fairly confident that the previous luthier didn't do precision fret leveling with the neck in the playing configuration. What they may well have done is a what I call a passively straight neck with a leveling beam or a radius block, which is the way I think the vast majority of people do it, and it is 95% better than not doing it. But as I explained this morning, and the reason as to why I do it this way is actually the minute you restring the guitar and put it under playing conditions, it goes back, it takes away from that original accuracy that the passive fret leveling method does. There's also the other reason is that the passive fret leveling neck with the neck off or in the passively flattened condition, that's actually quite costly in terms of fret metal, whereas the method I use takes only as much as is required to free up those notes, and we can hear it doing it as we go along, so there's no kind of mistaking it, the degree to which it improves it. So I've said to Daniel that certainly with this guitar there's a couple of issues. I would want to replace the nut, I would want to spray the electrics, clear them up, I'd want to make sure the springs were stable and weren't making amplifying the rattles or string buzz of any kind. But then I think there's going to show up to be an issue with some not perfectly seated frets down here on the bass side. And it's quite common, it's quite difficult. This is a refret, and it's actually quite difficult, as a person who's done loads myself, it's quite difficult to get the ends always perfectly flat. Now, when I refret a guitar, it may also not get all of the ends perfectly flat, particularly where you've undercut the tang and this bit sticks over the binding, let's say, of a Les Paul. That tendency, because it's not held down by a tang, which runs all the way along there, if that's the end of the tang, the tendency is that bit curls up. It can do because of the way it's cut. The way it's hard to cut it without it curling. It's hard to bend it back without ending up with a bad bend. So this very end bit on a lot of frets can have a tendency to lift up. Also, because on some older guitars, the edges of the edges of the fretboard can often be worn from kind of thumb gripping and finger pressure, which means that the radius, instead of being a perfect curve, can actually end up being a sort of, you know, a kind of steeper slopes on the edge there with a nice radius on top. As a result, if you bend, I'm going to do the picture thing. If you bend, or if you radius some wire ready for fretting, sorry about this. If you radius some wire ready for fretting, what you can find with an old worn neck, you know, of a much loved worn guitar, nothing wrong with that, but what you might find is there's your actual fingerboard with its kind of worn, slightly worn edges. And originally, let's say it began, this one looks like a 12-ish, call it a 12. Let's say it began life as a 12-inch radius, and it was perhaps more like that, right? in its heyday. What you do is when you bend your frets, they actually bend as a 12-inch radius, which kind of follows the original radius. But as you can see in real life, you've then got a likelihood of a bit of spring up at the ends here, and actually in some ways you kind of want it. You really want it, because if you're going to if you want your fretboard to be, sorry, your fret rack, your frets to be a perfect 12, actually it probably does well that they stick up. But if they stick up, they may stick up too much because they're not really gripping too much, and so you possibly have lifting problems as a result, where it ends up being a bit more like that. A solution to that would be obviously to re-radius your fingerboard before refretting, which I prefer to do, so that actually you're working with a genuine radius. It's not easy to do without mechanical guides and so on. So if you do it by hand, it's also a little bit inaccurate sometimes, but it's closer than the natural sort of shape and wear of the board can be. So that's the start point for this. So as you can see, I've got a plan. And my plan is, I think there's some rescue on the edge of this. The good thing about doing fret leveling in the playing position anyway, as I mentioned, to just repeat myself, is that it's slightly more accurate than doing it in the passively flattened method. But it also only takes off exactly as much metal from the frets as is required to make it play to the action we've set. And you know, with this, I suspect that we won't see much cutting of the tool until we get over to here, and I suspect we're going to see quite a bit of leveling happening to iron out some tough spots. If all the frets stuck up at the same amount, then it wouldn't be a problem. Because it's the relative levelness of the frets that is the issue here, not the actual shape or the relative levelness of the fingerboard. It's just the underlying. The fingerboard is just the underlying substrate, if you like. What's also interesting here is I'm going to give you a little detective story here. As somebody who's done this enough times myself, what I can see here is that the previous person has rested the caul, the clamp, or the brass caul, or the inserts, has rested them on the neck in between, just before moving the new fret in and pressing it down. And those marks, actually I can see the caul marks, double parallel lines. I can see where they've rested on the board. Not a good thing. I learned that the hard way too. You can't align your caul by pressing it down and then clamping the fret. You have to turn it by hand, put it only on the metal, and then press it. Otherwise you'll get these little tram lines all the way down it, and that's clearly shown up here. Although it doesn't affect play, it's a bit of a telltale sign to the to somebody who's done it that way themselves. That's, I guess, the only way of describing it. Okay, so to do this guitar justice, what I'm going to do then, my plan, a bit like I'm going to remove my super duper wiring diagrams, which I don't currently need, put them out of the way because I might want the board for explaining things. What I'm going to do, my NHS treatment plan for this is the following. Given there's tuning instability and these strings could have slack in them, but there's still tuning instability, I'm going to, this is a well cut in terms of height. This is a really good first fret action. There's nothing wrong with that at the moment. A bit lower on the B and the G than the actual E, but it's not bad. It's good and low, so there wouldn't be any intonation problems off that. In that sense, it doesn't necessarily need cutting, so I'm not going to replace that unless it shows me a problem. But I will check all the heights, and I will possibly lower the B a little bit. I'm going to measure the action here. We agreed that this was either kind of where Daniel wanted it, or possibly, if I consult my phone. Morris, can I have my phone, please? Thank you. You can't have the vol. Just going to look at quick look at the picture of my notes on the board. Can you let go of my headphones, please, Morris? Come on, Morris. Come on. Sorry about this. short break, intermission. Okay, we've got action as is for this, so we'll just check what that is. I reckoned it was about 1.5 to 1.75 maximum. Yeah, there we go, it's 1.5. 1.5 and 1. That's pretty much exactly what I would aim for. So I'm just going to write it down for my own reference. So we've got 1.5 low E and 1.0 high E. Okay, and what the target is to make this play the way that Daniel wants it to play as is. So I'm going to begin by taking the strap off this elaborate strap locky thing. There we go. It's like one of those delta shaped things. Okay, so I'm going to check the curvy thing, relief. Excuse me. Check the relief. My capo. We had a good conversation this morning about the pros and cons of the 0 fret. Obviously, because 2 of the headless guitars that Daniel brought have 0 frets on them. Okay, so let's see. We're just holding that down, and that's about, I would say it's about a 1/10. I'm not the best judge. I'm not far off, but I don't claim to be able to do it with robotic precision. Difficult. I always find this, I don't know how people manage to actually do this without making things move. Okay, it's about 0.2, so it's around about where I would want it. So I don't think the problem is with the amount of relief in this. Obviously, the more relief you have, the more room the strings have to move when you're playing, which may well, yeah, it's about 2. The more room strings have to swing at their, well, not the neck centre point actually, but at the string centre point. So it gives it a little bit of a room to spin. The more relief you have in your neck, the higher the action tends to feel here, regardless of how you have it here. Obviously, if you have it really high here, it also feels high as well. But even if you've got a low action set at the first and the last, but you have quite a lot of relief, you can get surprisingly high feel. Obviously it's common sense in the middle as this scoops out and gives you literally a higher action in the middle. So just to quickly recap then, what we've got is a guitar where I think the tuning instability is mostly to do with the strings at the moment, but I'm going to check these nut slots just to make sure, and I can widen them anyway just to be on the safe side. What I'm then going to do is because the action down here is set as far pretty much as I'd like it, the relief is pretty much as I'd like it, the only thing I'm going to go straight into doing on this is to mark up the frets and get some new 400 grit on my most delicate tool, and get onto gently leveling these. Now on this one I'm going to do something slightly different. It's like no big deal. I'm going to take my 200 grit, slightly wider one, which I tend not to want to use. It's a trade-off. It's half the thickness of a typical fret leveling file. It's twice the width of my thinnest full-back standard fret leveling file. So you can see there's a bit of either or going on here. So what I'm just going to do, I've done this the wrong way around really, I'm going to take off this is good stuff, but it's 220, and what I'm doing here is that I think this guitar needs so precise a touch. I'm going to go from 220 to 400 grit on this tool, and the reason I'm using this tool is even though it's wider than some, its advantage in exchange for that width is that it's this U-channel design, and that means that it's actually stiffer and it holds the precise radius shape a little bit better than my other one that I use most of the time, which is, it's just a matter of personal preference. I use them, instinct sort of puts me in using one at one time and another time. When I feel like I'm under an ultra precise challenge, which I think I am with these guitars, then I tend towards sacrifice the narrowness for the additional rigidity of holding its shape during the level. And to me, that's usually governed by a need for the most precise low action, or when, you know, the player's style demands that precision. Some, as I say, some kind of rhythm players and some amplified other players don't necessarily need that exactly the same precision. It's not. It's you know, it's not a given. It's swings and roundabouts. So anyway, I'm just going to clean off the glue here, get ready to stick on some more paper. So I'm just kind of making sure the surface is as straight and flat as it can possibly be. It's a really nice this is a really nice surface, this U-channel truss rod. Came all the way from America. You may well be able to buy them here or over in the UK or wherever you are, but in this case I saw it advertised on StudMac and I bought it from them, and it's repaid in terms of this nice flat surface and the rigidity of the thing. Okay, so a couple of ways of doing this. I can either just mark up a shape and mark up some paper and chop it off, which I probably will do because it's quicker, or I could have peeled back and gone for that, but I'm just going to use this and a ruler. So the idea of this is, coming back to the overall job, it is an interesting one from a luthier perspective, and those of you who watch this because you do setups for friends or as a business, you know, I think this will be kind of, yeah, there you go, straight into the aluminium. I think it will be a familiar dynamic to you, and I think anyone who wouldn't admit to the kind of slight trepidation sometimes when you have a customer and you can't quite work out what it is they want, or you feel the customer's guitar and you're thinking, what's wrong with this? Nothing's wrong with this. And first take, it can be quite a daunting thing. And again, this is absolutely no disrespect to Daniel. You know, it's one of the things that I was fairly clear about from the start when we were discussing these guitars, is that this was going to be quite challenging in that respect, because, you know, I think it always is as simple as that. You know, that we are talking about subjective, very subjective experience, and in some ways the more skilled and experienced a player is, the tougher that the more subjective it can be, and the tougher it can be to meet that standard for them. And I'm not complaining of that at all. I hope you don't think I am, because it's actually what we are here to do, those of us that do any of this kind of stuff. But I think the thing that I kind of was saying to Daniel at length today, is that as a luthier or a tech, you have to keep in mind that there really is a limited range of variables at play in this. If you can't get a guitar feeling the way a customer is happy, then it's something within that set of limited variables. Now, one of the things I know for me, a fault or a flaw in my own practice, is that sometimes I wimp out with the fret leveling. My natural tendency is to err on the side of caution. I'm averse to taking away fret metal, and so I don't if I can get away with it, and sometimes I don't go far enough. An example was Daniel tried out my headless prototype guitar this morning and I could hear it buzzing on, so a little bit of buzz on some of the notes, and actually the truth is on some guitars it takes 2 or even 3 fret levelings to get it exactly right, and in some ways you wouldn't, part of me doesn't feel good admitting that, but another part of me knows that that's because I err on the side of caution with fret leveling. But the truth of the story is, as I found out with my Graham, RIP, Graham neck Stratocaster, which Daniel tried out this morning, is you get it perfect if you keep going until it's perfect. You just have to have the courage to keep going with the fret leveling, and it always looks worse than you think it is. But if you want a certain action and you want it to play cleanly, it is only a matter of mechanics between several variables, several simple variables in this equation, some of which I've already talked about. And then the only kind of, the thing that's not missing, but the thing that makes a difference is whether you stick at it. I think in the previous tech, luthier who would have maybe leveled these frets after installing them may well have backed off. I'm anticipating I might find they backed off. Sorry, they didn't back off. They leveled them passively. And the fret rocker would have said, yeah, that's good, and then they would have put the neck on. But there's a difference with the neck loaded with the compression effects that the strings put on it, and that can throw the frets out that you think have previously levelled when it's passively flattened. So I'm cautiously confident that my method here will kind of throw up that, and as I say, it's not criticism of the previous luthier's skill. I think if anything it'll only just highlight the limitations of that method, which I started out doing when I first did this, and I know many luthiers still do, including some of the big famous ones, to the point where I still get people coming on my videos and tell me to stop being stupid and to do it the proper way. You know, so there's a lot of attachment to doing it that way. Okay, so I'm going to go first off and put some stuff on top of it. Now I don't know what the material of these frets are. I don't think they're stainless though, but they're kind of a gold compound. It may or may not be harder to cut or to work with, we shall see. They are very attractive in their gold shininess. It may be similar to what, no, I was going to say Brian May uses, he doesn't, he uses gold strings, doesn't he? Okay, so I'm starting out the process in the normal, absolutely bog standard normal way, getting the frets marked up. I'm happy with the string heights at the nuts. I'm not going to do any adjustment there. What I will do afterwards is a bit of leveling, a bit of widening, just to make sure there's no danger of the nut being implicated in any of this detuning or tuning instability. I think it's mostly just the slack in the strings. You know, and I have to say, it does attest to the previous luthier getting the basics right here. And I think if there's ever a gap, it's in what Daniel kind of spoke to me about in the first instance, which is he suggested that the speed of which the previous luthier did the guitars and got them back to him unsettled him, because he felt, you know, how could he do it that quick? And come on, note. Now, it is possible I tried to explain to Daniel this morning that in a way the setup doesn't get better by adding more time to it, and it may just be that the technique that this previous person was using might just not have been quite good enough to iron out the uneven frets to the point that would suit Daniel's playing style and the action chosen. So it could just simply be that, and I don't think it's a matter of adding more time to it. So what I did suggest was that I would get onto this with my method, and I would treat it from the kind of point of view that a precision fret level may well turn up and iron out the buzzing here, in which case what we'd get is the guitar pretty much the way that hopefully Daniel will like it, just by a very small dusting with my 400 grit, very light sanding approach. Now what I'm doing, and Daniel will be interested to see this, and it's on my other videos, but what I've done is I've used the simple maths of these 3 points to map a curve, which is quite easy to do with three equidistant points. And then I'm bending the tool with its sandpaper on the bottom, self-adhesive. I'm bending the tool to a point where it matches the curve exactly. Having done this loads of times, I can tell you that it's a feel thing. I always use this point as my pivot, no, my fulcrum, but my intention is to make sure that these two here touch the tool exactly simultaneously with the same amount of pressure. And when I've got to that point, I know that the bar is curved pretty much exactly as the neck is, and as close as I can get. Now, it's never going to be 1,000,000,000% accurate, but it's pretty close. Having mapped that curve, I now drop the string off and I just spread the string off slightly. And what I'm going to do now is, this is the bit, I'm going to just lightly, with the gravity at play only, I'm going to just lightly let this tool do a little bit of work, and I'm going to stop. You can hear it cutting, but there's an interesting thing that comes up, and Daniel, for his benefit, I'm going to take you a walk down this as close as this camera will go, and I'll point out things as we go. Sightseeing tour. Okay, first thing is, diagnostically, if it cuts all 3 places at once to some degree, I know that I've got the curve right. If it cuts only in the middle, I'm probably too curved on the tool, and if it only cuts at the opposite ends but nothing in the middle, the chances are the tool is too flat. It isn't exclusive, because it might be that there are a bunch of low frets in the middle, but the diagnostic for me, all it tells me to do is to recalibrate if I see any of those 2 things, so I know to recalibrate. Did I say something about overthinking this? It's my job to overthink it. But you can see here, cutting very slightly, cutting very slightly, cutting very slightly, not much, not much, quite a bit, a lot, relatively, some, not much, not much, some, a bit more, a little bit, none, a little bit, none, 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 none. So what you can see is it's cutting the high parts. Now the bit I didn't talk about earlier on, Daniel, when you were here, is the low fret dictates what your action is going to do. So if there's a particularly low fret in here, it will make the next fret high, regardless of whether that next fret is in fact, relatively speaking, the same height as all the other frets. So what I can really tell you about this is we've got a couple of clearly high spots, this fret here and that fret there probably, and a few that it's cutting, but probably more significantly is we've got some low spots, which are a couple here, relatively low spots, a couple here, and then these after here. This may well be because the previous luthiers added what's called fall away to his dressing job, which isn't a terribly bad thing to do, and it's not a problem for us right now. Interestingly, this technique does away with the need for that, for some boring reasons that you can probably work out, but I won't go into it. Anyway, so having done my first little dust across, and although you can see it's cutting quote-unquote metal, and as I mentioned before, it is a destructive process, I'll finish my sentence in a minute. Although it's a destructive process, this method does it in such a way that we do it only until we achieve we achieve clear notes at the playing action we have set in this playing configuration, and we stop at that point. And then, having done that, we know that we're not taking arbitrarily any more material than we need. Now this is pretty much going to be where I'm stopping with this track, or the E track as I call it. So it's not taking a lot, it's taking enough to guarantee the clear ringing of all of these notes. Now technically speaking, see that? Okay, let's take that for example. Here that's ringing, same finger, that should ring the same. That's what we're aiming for. Okay, so if you've seen this before, you'll know I use the same calibration for the first two tracks, and then I recalibrate for the next one. So here we go, landing it in there under gravity only. I'm not really pushing anywhere, I'm just moving from side to side, and I'm letting the gravity and the weight of the tool. What we're seeing here is that this fret is a particularly high one, but there are a couple more here, but that looks pretty good. And again, you tend to notice the low ones which stand out when you're doing this, and it's only important, as I said, because the low ones make the next one high. It's a relative thing. Now while I'm doing this, I'm remembering what Daniel told me and things I noted down, which is that he frets very lightly. Quite often you can find that fretting really hard will clean up notes where there's buzz, because basically pushing really hard lifts the string because it forces it up the side at a different angle of the fret. So light fretting is a key to kind of reproducing Daniel's experience. And another technician might not have really found that out, and as a result, let's say for example their own grip might be quite strong, and so that they may have stopped, or may have got the guitar to a place where with their perhaps heavier fretting the notes were being pushed up. In fact, if you could see this close up, you can do it on your own guitar, but if you press down it's fretted. You press harder, you can see this string buckle up and lift up, which raises it higher over the next fret. So a heavy grip can give you that added clearance. It also may make the notes go sharp if the first fret action is high, but that's another issue. This isn't going to be a problem on this because it's very low. But you can see how it's not a cynical thing, but it may be there's an element that somebody without thinking could be gripping it in the way they normally grip it, and so they may not have asked the question about how do you fret it. So what I'm doing is I'm deliberately going up here with a light, as light a touch as possible, and if I hear any zinging, as I call it, I'll just go back in, and it might be zinging might appear, even though this is cutting, it might be here because this one is still low and I can see it's not touching at all, and that low one, as I said, creates the next one as high, relatively speaking. So ultimately on a fretboard, your playing action is kind of dictated to you by the lowest fret in the series, and sometimes you have to make important judgment calls about whether you're going to stop and give up on the particular fret, because in some ways what you don't want to do is take 10 years of life off all of these frets just to get to something that's been damaged in the past and has a great big hole taken out of it, and somebody's maybe attacked it with a a 9-volt battery and some sandpaper, which is quite common to fix a localized problem, but then you get a dip and that makes the next series of notes unplayable. And sometimes if you deal with the neck as a whole, you might end up, as a judgment call, realizing you're going to have to take too much off all of them just to get and bottom out this one, in which case, if you can see how big a deal that is, you may find that it's better to go for a replacement of one fret. But it's usually something that shows up pretty quickly, and again, it's just thinking and talking it through in your head, or on video as I do all the time as you go through. So as you can see now, I'm getting ready to do what I call the G track, and I'm going to recalibrate, and I'm again looking for, have I got the same curve still, or is the curve too extreme? And I'm thinking this is a fraction too curved now. Now you might be surprised, it could be because I got it slightly wrong before, but it also is more likely that, and it's very common, that the actual relief curve changes just slightly as you go across the radius, and this is the case. It's flattening out a little bit at this point. So what I like about this is you can really get to trust this. This tells you everything you need to know, and I really like it for that. Now obviously I've done, could be probably more than 300 setups in this method now, and you know, you obviously there's an experience and technique that you build up in that time that you won't get from scratch. But when you do build, and it's worth building up that technique and experience, when you do, it really repays you amazingly well, because it tells you what's going on and you can read it very well. Notice, by the way, while I'm doing this, I have a kind of central support. You could argue that it's fractionally more accurate if you did it in the stand-up position. It's not, because what would happen is, all that would happen is your curve would change, because the string weight, the gravity would change, and in fact if you put it up on its side it would probably become more pronounced, in which case you just end up making this more pronounced. So it's not really critical. This is doing it, what's important, it's got the same horizontal compression loading as it does when you're playing it. And it's one of those areas that even if people sort of concede that this might be a good way to do it, then you'll have somebody getting on the YouTube and telling me I'm an idiot because I'm not doing it this way. And if you think it through, don't do stuff just because somebody told you. Do it because it makes sense. If you do it this way, guess what? The gravity will no longer be pulling the neck down, so guess what will happen to your relief curve with the same loading of strings? It will get greater, because it's less gravity pulling back, so the curve will expand. Guess what you'll do to match this up? You'll curve this more. What you're achieving? Exactly the same thing. You're matching this to the existing curve. Have you still got compression in it? Yes. Have you still got the compression, the all-important compression in it? Yes. See? Think it through. Don't just do what somebody tells you. And that's why I do get a bit peeved when somebody gets on YouTube and insists they know better. Remembering to try and be as light as possible. I'm good with that, but I can see, again, I'll show you, Daniel, for your edification. I'll take some pictures too. There's a real cluster. I don't know if you can see it. In fact, you probably can see it. You start to look at the shed dust. Shed dust? Shed dust. You can see, look, there's a cluster of frets that are leveling here. Now, again, please don't take this as a criticism of the previous tech. However, can you see how a previous method of fret leveling, whatever it achieved, isn't doing what this method's doing, and this method is leveling out a pile of stuff going on here. Okay, that's just what the thing is telling us. Now, what I would suggest is that is the difference. You're seeing physically here the difference between the passive neck flattened radius block, or typically what somebody will use is, where have I put it now? I've hidden it away. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I have a block, here it is. No, that's not it. A thing with sandpaper on it. It's a spirit level, it's probably up at, here it is. Yeah, they're typically the tools that somebody will use for this job. So remember, they'll put the neck flat, they'll get the slotted ruler and they'll flatten the neck out, either attached to the guitar or possibly on its own. Then they'll get a beautifully flat thing like this or like this, both of which work, and they'll go right, or and the absolute flatness of this will impose an absolute flatness. Obviously, as they're going down the neck, they'll probably go a bit like this, hoping to respect the existing radius as much as possible. But look at my method. Right, that's less than half of the width of even the thinnest of these tools. The one I normally use is half that again. So if you think of, if we're looking down the neck, whose is going to respect the radius? No, yes, the radius. the inherent radius of the note, which tool is going to respect it best. I'm cheating, but you know what I'm saying. So that's another reason why this is a good method to do. But I think what you're seeing is this is quite a significant pile of grotty frets. So it's kind of, at this point in the setup, and please don't, again, I'm not trying to do this from a sort of told you so, because it doesn't guarantee right now this is going to be the way that Daniel likes. However, it's at this point where I know that I haven't done anything to this guitar that is going to cost it any playability. If anything, this is going to improve the playability. For a very small amount of fret metal, despite you being able to visually see it, it's actually a very small amount of material removed. But what it's telling me now already is that my assessment of it was pretty much right, that this wasn't flat. And what I'm just going to try and do is put this somewhere where I can take a photograph. Sorry about this camera, just gently moving things around. I just want a shot of this without too much glinting going on, because it's a really good case study of the difference really between yeah, that passive method and this method that I'm using. You know, it's kind of a visualization of the difference, and you really can see the amount that's coming off some frets and not others. Although at the moment it's now taking pretty much all of them. That's good. Okay, so yeah, onwards. Sorry about it. This is kind of long-winded because I think it's important to make the point. But from a text point of view, for those of you who do this stuff, or even those of you who've bought my ebook and are doing this, following these kind of processes and instructions, you know, this is the sort of thought process that tends to go along with it. You know, all from the position that, or from the start point, that there are only so many variables in this, no matter what the construction is. And I think one of the interesting things is that Daniel's carving is a very custom headless guitar, very bespoke, and he's not quite happy with how it is right now, and I wanted to try to get or explain or show that even with a headless guitar where he's made a switch out of the bridge from a tremolo to a hardtail, even with that you'll find that it still follows the basic rules. There is a fretboard, there is a neck that is straight or curved when it's strung up, and there are frets that are or are not level relative to each other, and in a sense there is I'm going to do something on the board. This is for Daniel, because I sort of rabbited on about this morning, and I think I kind of made him slightly cross-eyed about this. I just want to reiterate the thing I was talking about. In fact, what I might do is I'm going to just go to here, give you a bit more reach, pushing the dead cup of tea out of the way. Can we see? Yeah. Okay. Just to make a point or two. Like a line from Oliver. So what I was saying about the simplicity of, can you see how you're doing? You're running. You're running. You know, we've got a kind of a point at this end, which is the nut. We've got a point at this end, which is the bridge saddles, and we've got really only a couple of things. We've got how high. Oh, sorry. Let's draw another thing. Then we've got a line. I'm going to draw a slight curve, but let's call this the line of the frets. All right, which is either curved or dead straight. But that's your baseline, right? And then at this end, you've either got some height of your nut, and you've either got some height of your bridge. And what you can see is then the obvious thing that follows is, whatever colour this is, you've got typically let's call it that. That's your basic geometry, and then obviously under here you've got fret, 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 getting closer, and all the rest of it. All right, so that's, of course, you don't. Let's be serious. You don't have frets all the way to the bridge, okay? So your neck goes like that, with a bit of body and stuff, pickups and whatnot. But that's basically your geometry you're dealing with. Now, it obviously isn't really a complete triangle, First of all, because the baseline is curved, and secondly, because the nut has some height and we've kind of truncated it a bit. But if we pretended for a minute that the line was dead straight, and then we had the nut kind of was almost zero or extended, we're working with a triangle just for the time being, with those aforementioned frets dotted all the way down, right? And what you can see is that if you increase, well, let's take it this way. What you can see is that given that triangle, there is this much height clearance, and the clearance increases as you go through. Obviously, the clearance then reduces as you press down the frets to the strings to that fret, but as you can see, it comes away again to the bridge, and it makes a smaller triangle, but it has a certain clearance which increases as well. So you can see that it's always a game of triangles when you're fretting. What's obvious is that the higher, and I'm exaggerating this, the higher you put your saddles, the bigger all of your clearances will be, which is why, as I explained to Daniel this morning, most guitars with inherently uneven frets, which they all come with to some degree or other, the action is always set at X, the level, the height at which the action clears the effects of those uneven frets. Obviously, conversely, the lower you put your action, the faster those uneven frets are going to mess with your playing, because the clearances are reducing massively as this goes down. The truth about the action at this end, even though it's not a proper triangle, but the truth about the action at that end is that it has two main factors. One is the ease of play, right? The guitar feels usually lighter or heavier to play depending on the lowness or highness of this action. And the other thing is a secondary thing, is the intonation issues that come when it's too high. So if that first fret action is too high, you literally have to kind of bend the string down to make it play. Now, all the same clearance business applies as well, but the amount of depression you have to play at those early frets close to the nut, because of the height of the nut, forces things to go sharp, and it messes up the intonation. That's the story I was telling you, Daniel, about the Baby Taylor. Okay, so it's a game of a triangle ultimately, even with this slight curve in there. That's just an anomaly for our purposes, but the principle applies. You can see, if you think about the curve, you can see how a curve allows room for the strings to resonate a bit more, or oscillate, but in fact kind of reduces slightly. So the more curvature you have, it gives you room in the middle of the neck, but actually technically it just fractionally reduces the clearance of those angles as the frets climb away from the midpoint. So on one hand, some people think that they can get rid of buzzing. Technically they can. If they've got some cluster of uneven frets in the middle, sometimes bending the neck even further or increasing the relief even further can temporarily create the space to lift the strings clear of some of those frets. But later on you can actually get some problems later on, because the gaps down here are smaller. But it's usually people seem to me to go at the whole relief thing for all the wrong reasons, and some texts and experts on forums even suggest it as the primary way of adjusting the playing action. And to me, you don't go at it with any intention of adjusting the playing action. The point of the relief, it should be as low as you can get away with, as little as you can get away with, without getting string slap, and combined with careful precision fret leveling and getting your action set the way you want it, the relief should be a workable minimum. Okay, and in this case we've got it as low as 0.2, and if you looked at the manufacturer's specs on most guitars, they say quite a lot higher than that, usually say a lot higher than that, some as high as 0.5, and you know, that's quite a big increase in the way it feels. But again, a lot of guitars are set at the shop to a kind of workable, get out of jail sort of compromise, I would call it. Sadly, some Gibsons sitting in the showrooms in shops are just not even bothered to be adjusted on the plastic nuts, and they go out like that. Anyway, one thing, if you've stopped gone for a cup of tea or a pee break or whatever, and you've been chatting away, come back and recalibrate because you've forgotten what was going on. Now this one, as I'm noticing, this is amazing. This is leveling out, flattening out in the centre of this neck, and it could be that it's doing that all the way across. But I still think there's some relief in here still. Yeah, there is. Not a huge amount, but it's very, very small, and I'm almost running out of adjustment on this truss rod now. And in fact, what it can do, if it needs to be, it can just put a little bit of bend on here if it's curved over time. Just want to get this thing flattened out. Now it doesn't matter that I'm doing that. All that will happen now is this will hit the far end first if it needs to be. Actually, it's probably just about right. So I'm just looking down here. We've got a tiny bit of curvature in there still. It's quite hard to bend this because it's a box section. That's just about right, but it's telling us that in this part of the neck we've got an almost flat profile. So I'm just going to drop that back in there, and same game. One of the things as well that I found from doing this lots of times, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that there's a low one there. It's not even touched. It's taken quite a bit off these, and it hasn't even touched that one. All the way across the middle this one's low, and I can't tell you why. It's not my business to know. It's taking off that quite a bit. That's high, but we've got untouched. So I showed you the picture earlier on, Daniel, of that on my phone. That's all it can tell you, is that that is been pressed in lower, and or it's been treated separately or some other time sanded down, so it's actually mechanically lower than the frets either side. Anyway, yeah, so the other thing I was going to say, what was the other? Oh yeah, the other benefit of this method is this, it's not so important on this kind of guitar, but on a Les Paul there is a stiffening up from about here to the end of the frets, and consequently that it doesn't respond to the curvature of the truss rod. That results in a shape that's like a blade of a sickle and a handle which come together, and if you can try and imagine, it's exaggerated, but where they come together there's a kind of knuckle like this which exists about here on a Les Paul, and as a result it gets in the way. If you're trying to make a smooth curve from start to finish, that knuckle kind of comes up 2/3 of the way along and then kind of straightens out to a plateau. And this method, because it attacks it with a single curve, it gently hollows out or scoops out that knuckle. Yes, it does it by taking a bit of fret metal, but it does it in such a way that it obviates the need for what other texts do called fall off, which is fall away or something, which is where they physically kind of attack these frets, and they do it in a sort of backwards slope to make sure that one after is always lower than the one before it, which technically would always guarantee clearance. If you did that all the way along your neck, and this one was an inch high and that one was wafer thin, you'd always solve the problem of, if they all went downstairs, you kind of, when you fretted them, you'd always be solving the problem of not enough clearance, but you would have a ridiculous amount of discrepancy between this fret and that fret. Anyway, this system of fret leveling does away with the need for it. I think we're almost there with that one. You can hear the string scraping on the frets where it's scratched, the sandpaper scratched it, but that's fine. I'm happy with that. I'm not going to take any more off there. Now I'm going to recalibrate for the A track, and I'm expecting to see some real cut up starting now. I could be wrong, but I don't think I will be. And now I'm just really cautious. I want to get this exactly right. This thing is now telling me that we're practically, it's telling me the neck is currently just fractionally straighter than this tool because it's moving too quickly over this fingerboard. And that is a slight challenge now because I don't have any more bend that I can really put into this other than to just try and straighten it out. Just a little bit of a tweak there. It's still curving because it's sort of inherently curved. Maybe that just constantly having it with a bit of tightness, a bit of curvature in it, sort of keeps it permanently that way. Yeah, still got a curve in there. It's very hard to straighten it out without doing damage, so I'm going to not bother. We are pretty much on the mark. Oh, sorry. And it doesn't actually go the other way. It's only a one-way thingy here. Stand up here. I mean, it's practically on the mark, but it could do with it being dead flat. But it's limited by how it was built, so that's as good as it will get. But this is still close enough to work with. So, okay, so this is a really important track. So I'm just going to tackle it first of all from a sort of diagnostic perspective. It's the A track, and I'm just having a look what's it showing me. Okay, so straight away in the A track, cutting, let's get the light on it, sometimes it's hard to see. Okay, cutting, a little bit, almost none, a little bit, some, none, little bit, more, lot. Okay, so you can see straight away there's an unevenness going on over here. The key thing about all of this is we're going to do this until it plays the way we want. So this is really about touch and feel. The looking part, as you can see, is more diagnostic than anything. The rest of this is touch and feel when we come to try it out. And I'm sort of moving from side to side a bit because I don't want to put a flat spot. I want it to respect the radius as much as possible. Okay, so over we go. Now remember we had that buzzing. Okay, now what you saw there was playing it very lightly at the kind of level that Daniel was saying he plays at. It stopped doing any buzzing, but there was still a little bit of buzzing as soon as we kind of laid into it a bit harder and fretted it a bit harder and plucked it a bit harder. So to me that gives it a little bit more to do on the levelling side. You can see there's quite a lot coming off there, still none off there at all, so that will cause you, that hole, that dip there is going to cause unevenness, full stop. So why one is lower than all the others, I have no idea. Now we go past it without any major problem now. I'm going to do it a little bit more. And the reason is just because, in fact what I'm going to do, I'm going to recalibrate just to be on the safe side. I'm going to do it a little bit more because I want to prove the point for Daniel. Not that I want Daniel to be happy with it, and kind of prove the point, I suppose, about the difference, if possible, the difference between the two methods. And yeah, this could do with being a little bit flattened out in my book. So it's practically there. Yeah, it's very satisfying, you know, because I'll take a good map photograph of this all, you know, and the point is, it does appear to be quite a considerable difference, or a lot more work required doing than what's already been done. And you know, obviously this is quite common, right? This has now got all of the frets now to some degree or other, but you could see that it wasn't even because some kicked off first before the others. Much better. Yeah, that's practically spot on. Good. But you can see it's taken some material off to do that, especially there as well. Yeah, yeah, I'm very pleased. So it's, you know, it's validating to get to this stage and go, okay, I know this is going to play great, and anything else I do now to maybe stop the springs rattling a bit or whatever, and clean it up and restring it and oil the board and whatever, is going to be kind of largely cosmetic finishing touches to a nice playing guitar. And you know what's really interesting about these, and I'm really grateful that Daniel brought them, is because it's a really solid example of, it only takes a tiny thing to change for us to feel that we're not happy with it, and then for it to what's the word? There's a word beginning with B. Blemish, no. Blight our entire playing experience of a guitar, and it just doesn't go away. And actually, once it's not right, it tends to stick and amplify, and it's hard to describe, but we just know it isn't right for us. And that's what's happened here, I think, as well as it being not quite right. Now this is really interesting. You see, the frets are tall. If the frets are really tall and you've got a heavy hand, you can bend them really sharp, and no amount of nut cutting can save you from that. Tiny little bit of that top end, but I'm going to go for it because I want this to be as perfect as the mechanics involved here can allow it to be. And I'm going to photograph this the whole thing so that we can literally kind of stitch it together and have a map of the whole neck, so we just see how difficult it is actually to get this to play well. And also that, you know, you can assess the difference between what a previous luthier has done to make it play. Okay, that's me done on the fret leveling, and like I said, I'm going to fly you, Daniel. Oh, we're on 1 hour, that's okay. Fly you above it so you can see down the neck. I'm trying to get the best angle. Right, so look for the dust along the side. Quite a lot coming away there. There's maybe this is a better view actually. So, fair bit coming off here. A bit less now, a bit less now. Fair bit all the way across these, you can see quite a lot of work here, and then look, a whole pile of stuff, especially around here, complete glut around here, as evidenced by all the dust. So there you go, that's what it's taken to clear those notes, and you can hear, there's no mistaking it now. You can hear from my playing just then, from when I started playing, and you could hear all of those buzzing extra buzzes that were going on to now they certainly sound clearer. I'm just trying to get the best possible neck portrait I can get. Something like that. Right, okay, feeling good. So now I'm on to fun stuff really. Of course there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to save this for the other guitars, by the way, so we're going to need that too. And there's no reason why it isn't also going to apply to the headless guitars. So the next step on this is I'm going to take the strings off, and I'm going to stash them away as sacrificial strings for another time. Probably not, I don't need them now, but they'll be useful. Sacrificial strings. This is going to be re-strung with 9s, which it's currently got on, so it's important that if you do a fret leveling like this, you're actually, it's not the end of the world. No, I'm not going to get drawn into that. That would be brain off thinking. I was going to say it's critical to fit the exact, well, the point is, if all that the guitar cares about when you level the frets is that the curve in the neck under load matches the tool you're using. Alright, and the compression is going to change very slightly between a 9 and a 10, although it will be some, and it will introduce a tiny amount of difference in the two. So, and like for example now, if we now reintroduced 11s onto this guitar, Yes, we'd get a more curved neck. Yes, we'd dial it back with the truss rod and we'd keep the action all the same, and pound for pound it would be the same. But you may find that it's possible that the added compression in the longitudinal way may cause it reintroduce a small amount of movement in the frets, in which case the perfect buzz-free level we had before may not be exactly the same, or it may kind of change. So it really is important to set a guitar with this sort of precision. You've got to be, ideally you would want to be doing it with the kind of configuration that you play with. And to be honest, if you were to change the strings after this, then my recommendation would be you would do a tiny upward movement with the saddles, and that would cure it, because the clearances, the differences in clearance that you'd get from adding the extra compression of 11s would be so small that you can clear it with an unfeelable, almost imperceptible raise of the bridge action, or saddle action, as you might call it. But it's tiny, and you know, to be absolutely precise, it's better to be setting up with your normal sort of playing stuff, which is again why it's really important to check that this is the gauge that Daniel normally plays with and wants on his guitar. Okay, so the next stage in this, again, you can probably see about, again, on a tour down this without the frets on. Still a bit of dust, but that's fine. But you can see that, look at this, some really, I think that's your minimum focus level. Look at this, great big flat high spot there that had to come off. Fair bit there, bit all the way across there, flat spot there, or flatter spot. Less, bit hungrier there, bit hungrier on this side there, hardly anything on there in the middle, hardly anything there, a bit on the edges. So you can see that it changes, and that one's quite a bit come off. There's a lot of work done to make that play, as you heard it just now, without any of those noises. What happens now, just think through logically, right? The strings are off, the neck is relaxed both longitudinally, it's expanded and it's leaned back, or it's no longer as curved as it was probably. As a result, it's changed its configuration. However, when we reload it with 9s, the loading is going to pull it back into the configuration it was when we leveled it, so that the relative level will return. It'll just be dialed in by the replacement or reloading and the standard tuning with the same gauge strings. So now what I'm doing is I'm remarking the frets, because for the next stage I need to get rid of any flat spots, but in such a way that doesn't lower or change the relative levelness, which would be a complete undoing of everything we have thus far achieved. And that would cost time, but more importantly it would cost fret metal, which is the real thing we're here to kind of pay homage to and preserve. Now these are jumbo frets, so I'm going to use my jumbo side of this particular tool, and it's a pretty good tool in that it saves time, and it's concave, and I run it across the top of the fret. I wonder if you can see it close up, because it would be good if you could. What I'm doing is I'm taking, let's do it, hey look, since I got it in my hand now, what we're doing is we've got a fret that looks like that, and that's no good. We need, the reason why that's no good, by the way, is because if this is the bridge down here, the center point of the fret used to be there, but now it's marched to here, which is, let's say that's one, it's not that extreme, but if it was a millimetre, you could see that the intonation now has moved a millimetre in that direction, which means it won't be intonated correctly. So obviously our aim is to reshape the fret and bring the center point back to the middle, but we don't want to change this height, because we've worked hard to establish that in relation to all the others. So what we have to do is we have to reshape this fret within the parameters we've got, which means kind of scraping off almost nothing, well, nothing on top. I shouldn't have drawn that quite like that. Nothing on top, but just the, if you count it, what I call the shoulders, right, either side, to give us this nice arch form, and that will then restore the intonation point to the center of that, and which is not only it'll be the right shape, it'll be the right height, and it'll be the right distance from the bridge. Woo! That's what we're doing, and this little tool here is very good for it. And you can see that as I start using this tool, it's starting to work off the shoulders of this fret, which is those bits there, and you can see it because it starts cutting there first. I get my right side again, and as I go, I'm trying to hold this down with 2 hands, as I go further into that, it takes more off the side. So what happens is the kind of silvery bit grows as we come inwards towards the top, and the aim is to leave this little thin pencil line of black down the middle, and as thin as possible, really. That's the target. So I'm doing a little bit of rolling of the tool, just a bit from side to side to round off that fret, and I'm going to do a little bit more on this edge because we know it's flatter on this edge because we had to do more, oops, sorry, I'm trying to hold it at a distance, more leveling work on that edge. But there you go, and I'm going to stop there. Then that's prepped now, ready to smooth all of them off at the same kind of level with sandpaper and what do I call them, you know, thingy pads, micro mesh pads. But that's the next stage after this. But I'm going to go through all of these now, doing the same thing. And what you'd find with this is that the more flattening that's taken place, let me make sure I got the right edge, the more flattening that's occurred to level them, then the more work I have to do to round them off, to get them back. You'll never get them, particularly if there's a lot of flattening on one side, you'll never quite get it back to being that perfect arch form. There'll always be a bit of wearing off on the edges, and I'm afraid that's the price you pay for getting leveled frets. But it won't affect the play, the slightly rounded off ends. It'll play great. The only way it would ever be a problem is if your strings were kind of right on the edge of there, which this isn't the case on this guitar, and it shouldn't be on the case. It shouldn't be on any guitar really. You should have more room, more real estate for the strings to hit the frets. If you're too close to the edge, they'll fall off when you're playing chords or notes. Okay, so I'm just going through all of these, and again, it's always diagnostic. You know, you do a bit and you stop and you see what it's telling you, and you'll see quickly where the flat spots are. And like I said, the beauty of this is that by the time you've done this, you've restored the intonation point to the centre. You, by the virtue of the fact there's this nice little black line of marker pens untouched, it's your way of knowing that you haven't hit the top of the fret basically, and if you haven't hit the top of the fret, then you haven't changed its relative height relative to all the other ones in the rack, and that's of course what we're doing any of this for, is to make them level with each other. Now I have to say, Daniel, this has taken more fret leveling than I expected. It's absolutely perfectly fine within the tolerance of the amount of fret material that's there. There's no problem. This is much more than I would have expected. I thought we were just going to find a couple of spots over here, but it's more. But you can see that the process doesn't lie, because you can hear the notes cleaning up as we clear those little clearances. We open up those little clearances, so you know as you're going along that it's doing the right thing. The only question then remains is, why didn't the previous method achieve it? And I guess there's a couple of reasons. It either could have been done badly. That's obviously possible. I'm not saying, I wouldn't assume that a well-meaning guitar tech would have done it badly. I don't think anyone sets out to do anything badly. It may have been somebody kind of cheeking out before they got too far because they didn't want to level and lose fret metal. I mean, if that happens, the bottom line is that's a very noble thing, not wanting to cost fret metal, but you're then going to give a player back the guitar that's going to have some buzzing in it. Or it could be just what as I mentioned before, what we're looking at here is the inherent difference that the compression loading, i.e. doing this original leveling with the neck underload in its plain configuration, it could be we're just literally seeing what we're working on here is the difference between that and the passive fret leveling method. And maybe it could even be that my made up figure of what I say is like maybe 5 to 10% less accurate doing it in the other fashion, maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a bit less accurate. What I do know is that doing it with a passive flat neck method is 100 times better than not doing it at all. If you get what I mean, you can really make substantial improvements, and exactly why, as I did in the first 100 setups I did, where I did it that way, I made a lot of nice playing budget guitars that way. So we're not really critiquing that method, other than we're maybe just highlighting the difference between the two methods and showing up physically which one is more efficacious than t'other. And it's a tricky one, you know, like I said, that it's too tempting to pick up on someone else's work and, you know, feel fantastic because another luthier's not done it your way, or it's done it wrong, or, you know, there's a real temptation to, you know, get off on that, you know, and kind of boost your self-esteem by, hey, my way's so much better. And it might be, it is, but I prefer to be a bit more understanding and empathetic, in that it's hard, full stop, getting something the way a customer wants it, even if you ask a million questions and you're kind of very, very sensitive to, you know, what they tell you. It would be very difficult for somebody to get it the way I wanted my guitar, you know, because it is such a subjective, experiential thing, how it plays. So I don't blame anyone in it. I just think if you learn anything from it, maybe it is something about the difference between these two methods, and maybe encourage you to give it a go if you haven't, or maybe encourage you to give it a go if you've been hugely skeptical about it, or, you know, if you're somebody in this business doing this kind of work for other people, maybe try, you know, go the extra mile to try and find out what it is that is or isn't right, or you know, get people to tell you more about what they're feeling when they play their guitar, and, you know, so see if you can work out what's happening for them, instead of maybe just relying on words in an email. So you still won't necessarily be right or get it, but you'll probably stand a better chance. So at the moment what I'm doing is I'm just taking off the any kind of surface oils, but also the dust that's built up as much as possible. I'll clean it again afterwards, but you can see there's a lot of gunge. A lot of that's the what's that stuff, you know, marker pen as well. Everything's going to be dusty at the moment. That's not a problem right now. What the next stage now will be, actually we could hold off that for a minute. What I'd like to do is, what would I like to do? I wanted to straighten out these strings and remove them, but that's going to be boring for you. So I'm going to take them out, remove them, and have a look under the back cover, just to see if this is actually making any difference, or if there's anything loose, like springs dangling too much in that. Given that I've got these now playing in a way that I think is really good, I don't think it's going to be a big issue, but I still like to have a look, and while I get a chance, I'd like to give these a blast with air. So I'm going to go offline, do all that, and then I'll come back once I've masked up the neck, ready to go, because otherwise it's just going to be boring, repetitive stuff. So see you in a minute. Okay, back on in the boring mode. I don't know why, but it's probably more interesting talking than it is listening to the radio at the moment. Don't know why, but I tend to listen to LBC, and for some reasons, sometimes it just drives me mad, so I don't. Anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting some thinner strips of masking tape to mask off the neck, and then get on with the sanding out. And what I want to do is I want to finish this guitar today, because I want to be able to test play it this afternoon, and actually then send a text over to Daniel to reassure him, because I know it felt a little bit like bringing it down here was his last kind of hope, in terms of actually confidence. trust in getting anyone to help put it right. I think, you know, I've had quite a lot of people come and say that, you know, they've spent money and taken their guitars to luthiers, and too many times actually I've heard them say, you know, they got them back and they were worse than, either the same for the, you know, having spent money, or worse than they were when they took them. And it's just, it's a shame. It shouldn't be like that. Just a thing, you won't see it, but I've padded out the tremolo springs with some foam just in between the springs, and that's basically cut down on a lot of this, I don't know what the word would be, spring. It's kind of like a reverb, I suppose, isn't it? It's what springs do. It's not necessarily what you want when you're playing. It's not usually an intrinsic part of the sound, but if it is, and if it's, you know, if it loses something that Daniel, you preferred the tone to have playing acoustically, then just remove the foam and you can go from there. But anyway, but yeah, like I said, I mean, just a lot of people have brought guitars and told me stories, the same stories in many ways, of having paid money and getting guitars back that were either the same, if not worse. And I think from a luthier's point of view, if you're going to do this kind of work, you've got to, I think honestly, you've got to make a guitar that the customer feels is better as soon as they play it. If that isn't your target, then you're just wasting your time. It's not like an MOT where, you know, you could say it's kind of grudge money, and, you know, you can say at the end of it, well, there's the MOT done, off you go. You know, even if your car feels grungy, or you don't like the way it feels, the MOT's done and I've delivered that thing. It's not like that. You don't give somebody back a guitar and say, there you go, it's serviced, that's 60 quid please, and then they play it and it doesn't feel any better, or worse, it feels worse. You'll lose business. It's as simple as that. This has got, if there's one thing you've got to do as a tech or a luthier, is you have got to make a guitar that the customer immediately feels is better your priority. And if you can't do it, get out of the game. Sorry, but it's the only thing you're aiming to do, because the best you'll get otherwise is a grudge purchase, and they'll give you the money and go out feeling bad about it. And then, even as a well-meaning luthier, you'll get phone calls, or you get people complaining about you online, or you'll get people just feeling that somehow it wasn't good enough. And the point is, you may still have done your 3-4 hours. Unlikely. I will have done my 3 hours on it, but you know, you'll have done your hour and a half, 2 hours for your 60 quid or 50 quid, whatever you charge. But the point is, if you haven't pleased the customer with that, you might as well not have bothered. And in fact, you shouldn't really be charging them. I know it's not just, they're not just paying your labour. They're actually, it should, sorry, a long way around. It should be considered much more that you're paying somebody for an improvement, and if you don't manage the improvement, you don't charge them. You know, and if you can't manage an improvement, then you shouldn't be in the game. I'm sorry if that's a bit brutal, because otherwise, if you are in the game, all you're doing is charging people for an hourly rate of your time, and you'll go out of business eventually, because people won't bring things to you, because, well, they certainly won't bring them twice, because if you didn't manage to make a tangible improvement the first time, they aren't going to bring them back to you, or another guitar to you. They'll go somewhere else where they do get that feeling. And it's just such a basic. You're not an hourly labourer here. You are being paid to give somebody an improvement that they can perceive immediately. And if you can't do that, you should take it on the chin and say, I'm sorry. And that's what I'm prepared to do in this case. But I'm confident, having done this far, I'm confident that this is going to feel great. But if it doesn't, I'm not going to charge money for not making the difference that Daniel wanted. I can hear the difference, so that's me confident that there is a perceptible difference in how it is. So I think, I'm confident that I've earned my fee. But you know, you're not, I guess you have to just get out of this thing that you've been paid for your hourly labour, because you aren't. You've been paid for a tangible improvement. And I heard so many stories of people getting the guitars back and they buzz and they sound horrible or whatever, and then the tech goes on the defensive and says, well, you know, Telecasters always buzz, you know, they've always got fret buzz, it's part of the thing, or as a blues player you should expect it because ... And it's just the minute you hear somebody talking like that, basically what they're saying is I couldn't make it the way you wanted it to be. Now the point is, if as a supplier of services, or you know, a product, a setup, you've got to get good at assessing whether you think that the improvement that your customer's asking for is deliverable or not. You know, and in some ways I'm fairly confident that it was on this one, but as I said to Daniel this morning, I'm not 100% sure where we stand with the carve-in and or the Hohner, other than doing what I did here. And to be fair, if they've all three of them been through the same luthier, then actually I got a feeling I could improve the kind of tone and playability, or the fret condition of them all in the same sort of way, judging by how it's worked so far on this one. So, but actually in a conversation, I certainly didn't feel like I was in a position to overpromise, because you know, I was very at pains to state to Daniel that, you know, there are kind of a limit to what can be done, and beyond that I would have to hold my hands up and say I can't improve this anymore, and it may end up being a mystery as to why not, but it's at least being realistic. And if I can improve this one, I'll obviously charge for it and I'll go on and do the other ones. But if I can't improve this one, or if once I've redone it and everything, it just isn't good enough, then I won't continue, because I will be at least willing to admit that my method that I use has limits, may have limits, in which case I just have to be straight about them and say, we've reached the limits on this guitar, I don't think I can improve it for you. I think I did. I mean, there was a situation the other day where somebody brought a guitar, and I can't even remember how well, but I think Stephen bought some guitars a while back, and one of them was an Epiphone Les Paul, and to be fair, I didn't think, was it? Yeah, I think it was an Epiphone Les Paul. I couldn't see a way that I could improve on it. It was pretty good. So I just said, that's it. Don't, you know, it's not worth spending money on me trying to improve it, because I don't think I can. So I just think, you know, got to be realistic as techs, or guitar luthiers, or whatever you call yourself. You know, I think the other thing is it's really important too, is if you're new to the game, it's very difficult for the newcomers to the game to have built up the confidence that somebody who's done it for over 400 times now, like myself, can feel. You know, it's a really nice thing to have experience behind you, because you can fall back on something, and not only can you say with pretty good confidence what's possible and what isn't, and what the limits are to what's possible, you can also be pretty sure as you go along what the signs are telling you of what's possible and what isn't. So you don't have to kind of go through the motions with all, let's say, all three guitars here in this case, and then go, oh crap, it didn't work. You know, you can be, yeah, pretty sure from the start that you're either doing it, something that's improving, or it isn't. Sorry about that, a bit noisy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, and I'll do it off camera, I'm going to I'm going to polish out all these frets, and I'm going to use two pieces of 600, two of 1000, two of 15, and then I'm going to switch to the micro mesh, by the end of which these should be deliciously shiny, in the kind of new condition again. But it's a bit noisy and a bit boring. So I'll go off and you'll see me in a minute when I'm taking this all off. I'll give it one further clean and then I'll restring it, and then we'll take it indoors and play. Oh, yeah, and we'll check the intonation, which actually looks about right. It should be about right, but it's kind of an old Strat style intonation, so it should be simple. Okay, just a quick drop in. I've done the polishing of the frets, and what I'm just doing now is a little 10-minute detour to clean or polish up the headstock. So it doesn't take long to remove all the tuners, but it's the best chance of giving it a good old polish up. And I'm using this scratch remover stuff, which I'm just about out of completely now, but it's a really good compound, and it will just get the sort of surface layer of grime off this. It's a really good polishing stuff actually. I think it's American, but it's not cheap either. But I'm just looking around. The vole in my rescue bin has woken up, and he's now a bit on the active side. He wants to probably be released into the wilds. But there you go. There's a quick cleanup of the headstock. And I'm watching out for him because he's trying to climb. I think he wants to bite his way through the plastic cage. It's not the strongest thing in the world, but it's clear that he's recovered. He was practically dead yesterday, which is how they go. They're quite amazing little creatures. They go from practically dead to fully recovered in 12 hours or even less. So he's due for release this afternoon. I'm going to have to take him way across the fields to where the cats can't get him and set him free. But it's something I really like to do. I know it's a bit playing God with little insects, little rodents, but you know, once the cats catch them, if I can help it, I don't want them to crunch them up. And they do, I must say, they do love a little vole snack. Of all the rodents, the vole is their favourite. It's got all the right stuff. It's like a McDonald's for them. Anyway, like I said, I've given the headstock a quick clean, and like I say, it's a 10-minute detour. Just sort of freshens up the whole thing. Because the headstock is around the tuners, there's always an area that's really difficult to clean anyway, so it always gets ignored or done to the best of your ability with a cloth, but you can never get in very well on the flat surfaces around the pegs, so they get kind of left and it builds up. So this is a really nice refresh, and all I have to do is take the tuners off in order to do it, put them back on, put the string trees back in, and we're away. This one's got quite a bit of oil floating around. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe they've been extra oiled or something, but not all of them are quite the same. Anyway, I'm not doing a full clean on these, just a bit of a clean. Black is more forgiving than chrome anyway when it comes to cleaning them up. I'm putting them back also exactly in the same order. Small detail, but actually they're not all the same, and they don't all play the same or feel the same, and amazing how big a difference it can be when the tuner that used to be sticky, that you'd kind of forgotten about, comes back in a different place. It can feel really odd. Anyway, I'm just going back with my stringer trees. I can hear the vole trying his luck. This is these gone a long way in, these screws. It's quite something. More, given how low the string trees actually sit, it's a big, yeah, it's a long way. Anyway, yeah, so just a little additional thing, if you put an extra few minutes in to clean something up, can make a a nice big difference. Here comes Morris now, he's definitely come back to check out the vol. Since I think he caught it yesterday anyway. Or, I think he caught it originally, and I think his sister pinched it. So I think he probably thinks he has first claims to it, and he's got up there to have a closer look. Obviously it's not good to have it there because it's going to torment Morris all day. So as soon as I get a chance I shall go for a walk. Now I know that it's well, it will be time to take it away, and actually I should probably go once I've done this guitar because it's not raining for a bit, so I might as well take advantage of that. So putting the tuners back on, it's always a good idea to put the screws in first most of the way, and that stops the tuners from moving too much. And you can see how they line up as you put the things in. This has obviously been lined up in the past for a long time, so they kind of go back into familiar positions, and then switch to the other side and use the adjustable spanner. And before I switch to the other side, I'm just going to push gently or pull any that need kind of moving a bit closer or further from one to another before switching it. Once I've done excuse me, done those up, then what I will do is take off all the masking tape, give everything a quick once over, and then restring time. And then the restring process involves stretching putting the strings on, stretching the life out of them, then intonating them, checking the action again, which should be exactly where we left it. Should be no change on it at all. Yeah, just make sure everything's the way we want it. So, oops, I'm going to keep that stuff over there. I might use a bit of it on the front. Now, you will always get a build-up of dust from the fret leveling process. It's inevitable. So I come around and take off. The tape isn't really a protection against the dust. The tape is a protection against the abrasiveness of the sandpaper. So it covers all the areas that the flailing sandpaper may touch while you're doing the fret polishing. Having done it loads of times, I'm confident that that does the job nicely. So just get all of this lifted off, and then we'll get a nice rag with some naphtha on it, which I'm also out of now, so I have to order in some more. So I use Coleman cooking fuel. It's not quite as cheap as the industrial quantities I used to be able to buy, but they seem to have stopped that. It doesn't appear to be that easy to buy. It could be wrong, but I haven't found it that easy to buy 5 litre volumes as I did when I first started doing this. Maybe there's some sort of government health crackdown, because none of these things are that good for you. Anyway, so I use Coleman's fuel, which is effectively a fuel naphtha, and the purpose of it is that it's fairly, what's the word, you know, harmless on guitar finish. I have some other stuff which I've got plenty more left, and it's in fact a shellac or something A, which is a petroleum ether, and it's claimed to be the same, although it has a slightly oilier feel to it, which isn't a bad thing. It does clean up fine on guitars, and it does act as a solvent. It's just a little bit oilier than I would like. So I find the Coleman stuff is very good indeed, but as you'll see in a second, I'm just about out of it. So I'll get my last glug pretty much on this guitar just to clean off the surface of the guitar, get rid of any of the dust that's built up, the fret dust basically, and go around the sides, around the bridge. It's quite clean anyway, but It could use, I wish I had more of the scratch remover, because this guitar would really shine with a bit of that stuff worked over it. And it oh wow, I've got to show you this. Hang on a sec. That's tantalising, isn't it, Morris? Is that driving you completely bonkers? That little chap yesterday, he literally was gagging his last kind of death rattles, and now they're face to face, these two. You can't have him, Morris. Sorry. Yeah, he literally was on his last few seconds of life, and I held him in my hand for about half an hour until he came back. It was amazing because I could see a kind of an intelligence return from these eyes that were practically dead to begin with, and there's some kind of alertness returned to them, and I can't really tell you what that looks like other than you know it when you see it. So in fact I held him in some of this old thermal t-shirt for a bit until I thought he was ready to go in the, what's it over there, the tank. And I put him in the tank, and with some food and some water, food being seeds and some straw, which you can, it's not ideal for a bank vole. They prefer soil and grass, but anyway, it's enough for them to nest in for the night. And so he kind of clearly recuperated overnight, and now he's bounced back ready to go. So he was literally ready to release back to the wild, I'm happy to say. Always happy to say that, because it's nice to see them go. Right, so here we go. We have everything pretty much ready for restring, and what I want to be able to do is play this a bit this afternoon, as I mentioned, and then to tell Daniel my verdict on it, which I'm pretty sure is going to be positive. So here we go. That was a set of 9s before, but they were not colour coded. All but one of them weren't. I think there was a Roto Sound red chucked in the mix, which is quite often what you'll find. I can even predict what the luthier did there, is he would have strung all 6 with one brand, and then he would have broken the top one in stretching it or something, and he's grabbed for a spare Roto Sound red, which I've got loads of as well, because they very kindly do a one toppy free in every packet routine, which is really handy for exactly that situation. So he's grabbed one of those and put it in place. Hurrah! Actually, what I've got, just a quick thought, this scratch remover stuff is really good. If you can see it there, this kind of paint, ingrained paint from where the guitar's been sort of banged against something over its lifetime. Oh no, this isn't a spare pack. This came with the free strap, which I can really do without. Still, I've got loads of spares from before. Anyway, I was saying the scratch remover is really good for taking that white emulsion, or no, it's gloss, isn't it? The white gloss that you always get sticking on guitar bodies where they hit some skirting board or something in their travels. It's always the same. Black guitars always have that white paint on it from somewhere. So this stuff will take it off nicely. Before I do that, I'm going to put a bit of oil on the board with a bit of tissue. And I can say, with the strings off, you can really see those scrapes of the fretting call, and it's so telltale. It's funny. Also, apparently I think the previous fretter had, you can tell they used to press because they broke the overhang, and glued it back. Again, that's really easy to do because the overhang bit doesn't have any support on it, and if you kind of crank a bit too much pressure onto it, you run the risk of breaking the fingerboard. I'm going to get this done because I do need to rescue that Volt back to civilization. civilization. Morris, you can't have him. He likes a vole snack as much as anyone in the family. Morris. He's trying to get out, this little vole. He's climbing in the top corner actually, which I've not seen them do before. They've never usually got that far. It takes them usually a bit longer to recuperate. But this little chap is keen to go, isn't he? You're keen to go, aren't you, little fella? You're so healthy. You did a good job bringing him in alive. Just keep him out that corner so he doesn't escape through the little plastic bits, because that's what they did. I had a pair of them in here once and I left them. They were really unwell and they took about a week to recuperate, but they fully recovered. Was it them? No, it was a mouse. Actually, it was a mouse that bit its way out of the cage, because rather stupidly some of the cage plastic and the little thing ate its way out, and I didn't notice. Yeah, it was a long saga, but I didn't notice he'd escaped, so I carried on feeding him, thinking I can't remember what happened. I think I put another one in with him, and I thought there were two in there, and what happened was that they both chewed their way out together and escaped together, and I was convinced they were in there, and I didn't know any different, so I took them down to my release spot, camera running, GoPro camera running, took them all the way down there, and proceeded to gently remove the straw from the tank on camera, talking my way through it, and I got to the bottom, and there's this kind of moment of complete bamboozlement as I realised the thing is completely empty, and I had no idea. And of course I'd taken the top off and put it to one side, so it took me about 2 minutes before I even saw the holes chewed through the grill in the top, and then obviously I realised that they'd escaped, but of course they had escaped into the shed, so I had to come back and set humane traps, and I caught them one by one and went through the whole process all over again with a reinforced cage. So it was quite funny. So this is a really much favourite part of the game here now, putting the strings on after having done all the setup work. It's a really nice feeling. Hard work's done. Now is the final tweaks, and you know, this is the proof of it. Given that assuming the strings are exactly the same gauge, which as far as my fingers could tell they are, this is going to revert to the setup configuration that we achieved with the fret leveling, and then I will kind of stretch and worry all of the stretch or the slack out of the strings until they stabilize, and then the number one thing that you'll be able to say about them is that they stay in tune. And I was posting on Real Guitar's Facebook page yesterday this little sort of truism that I found, that there's in terms of whether you keep and grow with and sustain playing a particular guitar, or you dump it and give up on it, it comes down to the following things in priority order. The first one is, does it play in tune? That's the absolute priority it can have. It can look great, cost £1 million, be a Gibson, but if it doesn't stay in tune, nobody will keep it, and it will just get left on the shelf no matter what it cost. So staying and playing in tune is the first priority. I'm not even through the bloody thing, am I? The second priority is it well set up? Is it light and easy to play? Third priority is how do the pickups sound good? Fourth priority is, does it look good? Is it built well? And the fifth priority is it a sexy brand? And is it a really nice expensive guitar and prestige and all the rest of it? And got to remember, those are the things in priority of what, in my experience, causes people to stay or with their guitars or dump them and get something else. and those are the things that ultimately, no matter what we think to begin with, those are the things that prove to be the things that really matter over time. But actually, as I wrote them out, it struck me as really interesting that it's precisely the opposite that seems to be the case for a lot of people in the guitar world, particularly newcomers and some of the brand obsessed people who then sort of indoctrinate newcomers with the same sort of value system. And what really interested me was that often those things are the exact opposite way round. So what gets treated as a priority is the brand and the price, followed by the build and the look, followed by the sexy expensive brand name pickups, followed by how well it plays, followed by does it stay in tune. And that's why you've got Gibsons sitting on retailers' shelves, racks in their windows, that you can go into any guitar shop in the country and play, that don't stay in tune, have a terrible action, and yet cost a fortune, and will bankrupt you as you take them out of the shop, which is quite completely opposite way around. So I just thought it was quite interesting to, not the facts of it, but actually the fact that it was, in reality, it's reversed. What appeals to people is often the reverse of what's important. Okay, so if you see there, first of all, I'm doing a quick stretch just to make sure things seat in place, and often you'll find if the ball ends aren't seated, they'll pop up at that point. Now what I do is I get the strings, and with thumb and forefinger I go up and down each string all the way until I stretch them all, and the pressure is only where I'm applying it with my hands. I don't want it pressuring on the sharp bits of the bridge or the nut, so I'm using my fingers to ensure that the fingers are doing the stretching. And you can feel at this stage, you can just feel how much slack is being squeezed or stretched out of these strings. The strings become physically looser in your hand as you stretch them. And so it's not imagination, it's a very real amount of stretch. Then I put my first tuning in. So get this all up to tune. Right, in tune, then I go along and I do the same thing again. And the interesting bit is next how far out of tune this next stretch will be. And that will give you an indication of how much slack there is caught up in the strings. And people quite often say, do you need to apply so much force? And some people get really annoyed and tell me I'm doing it completely wrong, stretching the strings. And the answer is this slack will not come out of its own free will. It will sit in the strings until you apply the force, either through a bend or hitting a chord hard, or in the case of a tremolo, hitting the tremolo, and then it'll be out of tune. That much. And it won't be your tuners going backwards and unwinding. So you might as well get it out now. That's sounding much better than it was. So funny, with a new set of strings it never quite recreates exactly how it sounded before, so the comparison is always a little tiny bit off, but it's close enough that you can tell that the levelling part has achieved what we wanted, which is to clean those notes up. They don't sound the same as before, because before it had dirty strings and various things, and including the tremolo springs were rattling or resonating quite a lot, and we've quietened that down. So the tone of it will change because of that. But the important bit is, to me, are those strings ringing freely on all notes. See how much closer we are now. Lovely, I like this already. I'm going to do a little bit more stretching. This is often where the E string will break, mainly the E string. And then I'm going to do one more thumb and forefinger stretch and then some bends. Getting there close, we're not getting so much just detuning going on. One more of these. That will be 3 of these types of stretches, plus some pulls, plus in a minute some finger bends, and pretty much we'll stabilise around about that point. But I just advise you to keep going until it is pretty much immovable, because the more attention you pay now, the more pleasure you're going to have playing without worrying about tuning. And to me that seems like a pretty sensible investment early on in the game. Of course there can be stretch stored here and these bits too, so the more you can get out the better. Pretty much there now. It's a lot better. Okay, so the one thing I just want to check now is I'm going to check the intonation. Lose things. I'm going to do it on the tuner app. Tuner app? No, the tuner machine, for which I'll need the strap. And then we'll be done on this one. And then I'm going to text Daniel and let him know that the thing is done. The only thing I might just do on top, well, the 2 things I'll do. One is I'll check the width of the nut slots. They haven't pinged or caught or anything so far, so I'm pretty confident they're good. The one extra thing I will do is I'll put some nut stuff in, graphite in there. This is a strap and a half fixing. I'll put some graphite in there, and then I will test the electrics, and I will just possibly polish a little bit out the black front surface. Okay, so we'll just go straight into the tuner device for the intonation here. And again, the intonation is one of these things that people get really irate about, but you have to remember that there's no point in getting too precious about it, because one of the variables in the intonation setting game is the degree of force with which you fret a note, and that varies for everybody, so that one man's perfect intonation will be wrong for someone else who frets the note differently again. So what I do to test it is tune to the 12th fret harmonic, getting in a few more stretches there while I'm at it. And once we've got it tuned on the ping, then I'm going to fret that note at the 12th as lightly as possible. Now according to this it's a little sharp. Again, I'll do a bit of stretching while I'm in the market for it. The intonation is an interesting one because the attack is always slightly sharp, but it matters what it settles down to. Now on the A, A is about right on the intonation. Can't get it to start off. The attack is sharp, but it settles down to the octave. The E is sharp full stop. So the first thing I'm going to do with the E, it means it's too short, so I'm going to pull back the saddle a little bit. And that involves me dialing it back, which tightens it up and changes the pitch. So I just retune. Now remember, I'm going to try and fret as lightly as I can. Okay, I'm going to leave that there because it's settling on the right note. You can see you end up having to do the best of several. So it strikes. The attack is slightly sharp at the note. So what do you go for? Do you go for the attack, which feels sharp, or do you go for the trailed off note? Now if you pluck it gently, the attack is much less. So realistically, a gentle pluck, a very gentle pluck, plus a gentle grip, fretting, equals it's on. You squeeze harder, it'll be sharp. You hit harder, it'll attack sharper. So you can see there's at least two variables in that are never the same twice. Not for the single player or between players. It's coming across as sharp, so I'm going to pull that one back a bit. And find the screw. Back you come. I think that's a tiny fraction too far back. Again, you can see, like I said, it's totally variable. There's so much at play, it's almost unfunny. You find me somebody who's going to hit it and finger it the same. Excuse me, crude sounding expression. Slightly sharp. I'm going to pull that one back too. Missed the chance to release the voal without ringing. There we have it. Okay, we're done. Oh yeah, well that's playing. Okay, that's somebody coming in through. Right, we're done. Daniel, this one's finished. I'm going to do some graphite on there and maybe a little bit of polishing on here to bring out a bit of a shine on the front here. But apart from that, that's that done. I'm going to texture at the same time. So I'll see you in a minute.